The wind howled across the snow-blanketed plains, carrying with it a biting chill that seemed to pierce through even the thickest layers of clothing. The Apache, a rugged man used to the hardships of the land, had learned many lessons in survival. But this winter tested him like none before. Each step he took sank into the soft snow, pulling at his exhausted legs and sapping his strength. His breath rose in clouds, freezing instantly in the air, and his fingers, numbed by the cold, struggled to hold the worn leather of his coat together. He had set out at dawn with a small pack and his hunting knife, expecting a short trek to gather supplies. But the sky, once clear, had darkened by midday and the wind had grown fiercer, scattering snow in blinding sheets. He realized too late that he was miles from shelter, miles from the small cabin he had considered safe, and miles from anyone who could help him. Panic edged his mind as he stumbled across the frozen landscape. His ears stung, and a persistent ache in his chest warned him of frostbite and exhaustion. Then, like a phantom among the white, he saw her. A small figure moved across the snow, seemingly unaffected by the biting wind. She was an Apache girl, perhaps no older than 16, yet her presence exuded a strength that belied her youth. She walked with calm precision, each step deliberate, her eyes scanning the horizon as if reading the land itself. Unlike the Apache, she carried no heavy pack, no extra furs, only the essentials tied carefully to her body. His initial disbelief gave way to curiosity. How could anyone survive in this wilderness, in this storm, without fire, without proper gear? He called out, his voice cracking in the cold. "Hey,
Wait, how
are you out here?" The girl turned briefly, her dark eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. She didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. Her calmness spoke volumes and her gaze held a challenge. She gestured for him to follow, pointing to a distant tree line that barely rose above the snow. The Apache hesitated, shivering uncontrollably, but instinct and desperation pushed him forward. As he trudged through the snow, he noticed something remarkable. Unlike him, she left barely any tracks, almost as if the snow accepted her presence rather than resisting it. Her movements were precise, conserving energy, yet every action seemed purposeful, almost ritualistic. She stopped occasionally, crouching low, pressing her hands into the snow, and seemed to listen. He wondered what she heard. The approach of a predator, the whisper of the wind, the subtle shift of the weather. He didn't know. All he knew was that he could not keep up, his body failing him with each step. Eventually, they reached a small clearing surrounded by a ring of sturdy pines. The girl dropped to her knees, patting the snow, and motioned for him to do the same. Shivering violently, he sank to the cold ground, teeth chattering and limbs trembling. She crouched beside him, her movements fluid and assured, and began to demonstrate a series of positions and breathing techniques. Every action seemed to draw heat into her body, protecting her from the cold that threatened to steal the Apache's own warmth. For the first time, he realized that survival wasn't just about fire, tools, or brute strength. It was about knowledge, observation, and a deep understanding of the land, a connection that the girl possessed naturally, as if the wilderness itself had trained her. He watched her intently, absorbing every detail, hoping he could learn enough to survive not just this storm, but the winter that threatened to crush him. As night fell, the temperature dropped further, and the wind whipped through the clearing like a living creature. Yet the girl remained calm, almost serene, while he shook uncontrollably beside her. He had no choice but to trust her, to follow the silent wisdom that radiated from her every gesture. He had survived many winters, but he knew, deep in his bones, that this one would test him in ways he had never imagined, and that the lessons of this mysterious Apache girl were his only chance. The Apache's teeth clattered in rhythm with the gusting wind, his body shivering so violently it felt as though his bones might splinter. He watched the Apache girl move effortlessly across the snow, her every motion precise and controlled. She seemed impervious to the cold that gnawed at him, and yet she neither carried firewood nor extra furs. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to find some shelter of his own making, but something compelled him to follow her. He called out again, his voice hoarse, cracked by the dry winter air. "Wait, how do you survive this? Tell me." The girl stopped and turned slowly, her dark eyes locking onto his with a calm, unwavering intensity. She did not speak, not because she ignored him, but because words seemed unnecessary. Her gaze alone carried a message: watch, learn, follow. She extended a hand, palm open, pointing to the path ahead. Though she said nothing, the gesture was clear. He was to follow her step for step. Reluctantly, the Apache obeyed, staggering through the deep snow, each footfall laborious. He noticed the subtlety of her movements, the way she placed her feet, distributing weight to avoid sinking too deeply, and how she bent slightly with the wind to reduce its impact on her body. He tried to imitate her, but the snow swallowed his boots with every step, and he cursed his own clumsiness. At one point, he fell to his knees, unable to lift his legs further, the wind whipping against his face like a living thing. The girl looked back at him over her shoulder, expression unreadable, but instead of mockery, there was patience. She turned and crouched beside him, gesturing for him to do the same. He obeyed, shivering violently, wondering what she intended. With deliberate care, she pressed her hands into the snow, patting it down and arranging it around them. Then she demonstrated how to curl into a tight position, head tucked to conserve warmth, knees drawn close, arms wrapped around her legs. She exhaled slowly, teaching him to regulate his breathing, to conserve the heat of his body instead of wasting it on panicked gasps. The Apache struggled to follow her lead. His body protested violently, every shiver a reminder of how unprepared he was. Yet as he watched her, he began to notice subtler things. The way she shifted weight slowly to avoid losing balance, the way her breath never formed the loud clouds that his did, the small movements that maintained circulation without exhausting energy. Each of her motions was purposeful, a language of survival spoken in the silence of the snow. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. It was impossible to tell as the storm thickened and the sky grew darker. The Apache began to recognize patterns in her behavior, the way she scanned the horizon, listened to the wind, and observed the snow underfoot for signs of hidden ice or danger. Slowly, he realized that survival was not merely about enduring the cold. It was about understanding it, respecting it, and letting it guide him rather than fighting blindly against it. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could survive this winter, but it would require humility. He would have to set aside pride and trust her guidance, absorb every silent lesson she offered, and for the first time in his life, he realized that survival was not a solitary endeavor. The girl finally rose, brushing snow from her clothing, and gestured for him to rise as well. He staggered to his feet, feeling the cold gnawing at him more fiercely than ever. Yet beneath the fear there was a budding determination, a sense that he was no longer completely helpless. The girl began moving again, each step precise and measured, and he followed, matching her pace as best he could. That night, as the wind howled and the temperature plunged further, he felt her silent presence beside him, a steady, guiding force. Though he was still far from understanding her methods fully, he knew that if he paid attention, if he truly learned from her, he might yet survive the merciless winter that threatened to claim him. And so he followed her step by step into the storm, determined to endure and to learn. The morning arrived, pale and gray, with snow still drifting lazily from the sky. The Apache woke stiff and aching from the night spent huddled in the snow, his body trembling despite the layers of furs and clothing he had wrapped around himself. He had learned a little from the girl the day before, how to curl tightly, how to regulate his breath. But he still felt wholly unprepared for the wilderness that had almost claimed him. The Apache girl moved silently beside him, her dark eyes scanning the horizon, taking in the frozen landscape with ease. She seemed not just at home in the snow, but in command of it. When she noticed him stirring, she gestured for him to follow. Wordlessly, she led him toward a shallow depression in the snow beneath a cluster of evergreens. The branches above sagged under the weight of ice, providing just enough shelter to lessen the wind's bite. "Here," she said softly, finally speaking, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We will see if you can survive the cold without fire." The Apache's heart skipped a beat. Survive without fire? He had never gone more than a few minutes without it in his life. Every instinct screamed fear, but he forced himself to nod. There was no choice but to trust her. She instructed him to strip off the wet layers that clung to his body, explaining that damp clothing would only draw heat away faster. The Apache hesitated, shivering violently as he peeled off the outer layers, exposing his skin to the freezing air. The girl knelt beside him and began demonstrating a series of movements, subtle shifts of weight, curling of the body, and controlled breathing, all designed to trap warmth and maintain circulation. Breathe slowly, she instructed, her voice steady. Tighten your muscles. Move even when still. Do not waste heat. The snow is not your enemy. It is your shield if you respect it. He mimicked her movements, trembling and clumsy, but gradually he felt the first flickers of control. By curling tightly, tucking his chin, and controlling his breath, he discovered pockets of warmth that had eluded him before. It was a small victory, yet it filled him with an exhilarating sense of hope. The girl then demonstrated the final part of the lesson, using the snow itself as insulation. She pressed it down firmly, creating a hollow where their bodies could rest while reducing exposure to the wind. Then she covered herself lightly with more snow, careful not to smother warmth. The Apache, skeptical, attempted the same, hesitating as the cold pressed against his skin. But as he adjusted, he began to understand. The snow, when used properly, was not a threat but a protective barrier. Hours passed. The wind picked up again and flakes swirled violently around them. The Apache struggled, losing control at moments, but the girl remained composed. She moved beside him, correcting positions with gentle touches, guiding him patiently. It was a grueling test, one that pushed him to his limits, but gradually he began to adapt. He learned to conserve his energy, to use the snow and his body as allies, and to trust that the cold could be survived without fire, if approached with respect, skill, and patience. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them, but the Apache could feel a profound change within himself. For the first time, he realized that survival was more than brute force or stubborn will. It was about observation, adaptation, and learning from those who knew the land better than he ever could. The girl looked at him, her expression a mixture of approval and challenge. "You are learning," she said softly. "But the cold tests more than your body. It tests your mind. If fear rules you, it will take you. If patience rules you, you will endure." He nodded, catching his breath, feeling the truth in her words. The storm might rage on, the snow might bite, and the night might be long and merciless, but he had survived the first real test. And in that survival, he felt something he had never known before. The humbling thrill of learning from someone wiser, stronger, and entirely in command of a world he had feared. That evening, as the wind died down slightly and the last light of day filtered weakly through the clouds, he felt a flicker of respect, not just for the girl, but for the land itself. The wilderness was no longer merely a place to endure, it was a teacher. And she, the mysterious Apache girl, was its guide. The Apache woke to another morning of biting wind and snow that stretched endlessly in every direction. His body ached from the previous day's ordeal, yet he felt a strange sense of determination. He had survived his first test under the Apache girl's guidance, and while the cold still gnawed at him, he no longer faced it entirely as an enemy. The girl moved silently through the snow, gliding as if the winter landscape were an extension of her own body. She stopped near a small patch of pine trees and gestured for him to join her. Today, she explained, the lesson would go beyond breathing, curling, or snow insulation. Today, he would learn to survive without fire, something that had always seemed impossible to him. She began by gathering natural materials from the surrounding area, evergreen boughs, dry grasses, and fallen leaves. Her hands moved quickly and expertly, layering each element in a precise order. Then, without a word, she demonstrated how to create a makeshift sleeping platform, raised slightly from the snow. She patted the snow around it, creating a small hollow to protect against the wind, and covered the top with more natural insulation. "You see," she said finally, her voice calm and deliberate, "heat is not always created by flame. Heat comes from your body and the snow, the leaves, the earth. They can hold it for you if you know how to use them." The Apache watched, amazed. He had always relied on fire, on its bright warmth and constant reassurance. The thought of spending the night without it had terrified him, yet here was proof that survival could exist beyond his previous understanding. Hesitantly, he mimicked her actions, gathering boughs and layering them into a crude platform. His movements were clumsy, but with her guidance, he began to grasp the principles. Insulation, windbreaks, and careful positioning could save a life where fire might fail. Next, she demonstrated how to wrap himself in layers of leaves and grasses, tucking them tightly around his limbs to trap warmth. He felt the cold pressing against him, but as he followed her lead, he realized that the insulation absorbed his body heat, creating small pockets of warmth. It was not comfortable in the way fire was, The cold still pressed in from every angle, but it was bearable, and more importantly, it was sustainable. Then came the final challenge, a lesson in patience. The girl instructed him to lie down in the snow shelter he had built, hands pressed to his chest, breathing slowly and deliberately. "Do not move too much," she warned. "Your body will generate heat, but only if you conserve it." Panic and struggle steal warmth faster than the cold itself. The Apache obeyed, gritting his teeth as the snow pressed against him, as the wind rattled the branches overhead. Every instinct screamed to move, to stamp his feet, to create a fire, but he forced himself to remain still. He focused on his breathing, on controlling the shivers, on feeling the heat generated by his body circulate through the insulation. Slowly, he noticed the cold easing slightly, the snow around him holding the warmth he produced. Hours passed. He dozed in short bursts, waking again and again, learning to balance stillness with subtle movements that maintained circulation. The girl observed silently, offering gentle corrections when necessary, adjusting a layer of boughs, showing him how to shift his weight without losing insulation, guiding him to keep limbs from freezing. By nightfall, he had endured the cold without fire for the first time. Exhausted but victorious, he felt a surge of respect for the girl and her mastery of the wilderness. She had taught him that survival was not a matter of brute strength, but of knowledge, adaptation, and patience. Fire was only one tool among many. Understanding the land, the snow, and one's own body was the true key to enduring the harsh winter. As they settled for the night, the Apache lay beneath the insulating layers, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. He realized that each lesson from the girl was reshaping his understanding of the world. The cold, once a relentless enemy, was now a teacher, and she, the enigmatic Apache girl, was the guide who had shown him how to listen. For the first time in his life, he felt that he might not just survive the winter, he might even thrive within it. The morning light filtered weakly through the gray clouds, reflecting off the endless snow in dazzling white. The Apache, though still stiff and cold, felt a sense of cautious confidence. The previous days had taught him the power of patience, insulation, and controlled breathing. But survival in winter was about more than warmth. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and the girl's next lesson would show him how to live, not just endure. The Apache girl rose from the snow, moving with the ease of someone entirely at home in the frozen landscape. She gestured for him to follow, and led him toward a cluster of trees where the snow was shallower, and the ground revealed signs of life beneath its frozen blanket. Small tracks marked the paths of rabbits, foxes, and other creatures adapted to the cold. She pointed to the footprints, then to a patch of bark and lichen clinging stubbornly to a tree trunk. With her hands, she began gathering roots, stripped bark, and hardy greens that could survive the frost. "Food is scarce," she explained softly, "but it exists if you know where to look. Do not waste energy chasing what cannot be caught. Look for what gives life quietly, patiently." The Apache knelt beside her, shivering as he examined the plants and roots she had gathered. His fingers, numb from the cold, fumbled clumsily as he tried to pull a stubborn root from beneath the frozen ground. She corrected his grip, showing him how to extract it without breaking it, how to recognize edible plants by subtle details, the color of the leaves, the texture of the stem, the smell that revealed vitality. Next, she turned his attention to water. Streams were mostly frozen, and snow alone was not sufficient. She taught him to find pockets of liquid beneath ice, how to break it carefully without contaminating the water, and how to filter it with layers of cloth or grass. She demonstrated how to melt snow safely using body heat and insulated containers, a delicate balance between survival and waste. The Apache watched closely, realizing that every technique was a precise dance with nature's harsh rules. Then came the challenge of hunting. She didn't hand him weapons. Instead, she showed him how to move silently, how to track animals by faint impressions in the snow, how to anticipate their paths, and how to capture them with minimal energy and maximum patience. His old ways when running, striking, forcing were useless here. He had to think, observe, and adapt. Hours passed as he practiced, often failing, often cold and hungry. Yet gradually, he began to succeed. A rabbit scurried past, and with a carefully laid snare he managed his first catch. It was small, hardly enough for a meal, but it was a triumph. The girl nodded approvingly, her eyes gleaming with quiet pride. "You are learning," she said. "Survival is not about strength alone. It is about respect, observation, and patience. Take only what you need, and life will continue to provide." By late afternoon, the Apache had gathered roots, greens, and water, and managed small successes in hunting. He ate sparingly, chewing slowly to conserve energy, yet each bite filled him with a newfound appreciation for the landscape he had once seen as a foe. The girl watched him carefully, occasionally correcting his technique, silently guiding him toward mastery. That night, as they huddled beneath their insulated shelter, the Apache felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not only had he survived the day without fire, but he had also learned how to nourish himself in a world that had seemed entirely hostile. For the first time, he understood that winter was not simply a time to endure, but a living ecosystem with patterns, rules, and hidden gifts that only revealed themselves to those patient and observant enough to notice. He turned toward the girl, gratitude and awe filling his chest. She had not just saved him from the cold. She had shown him the subtle art of living in it. Through her lessons, he was learning to see the wilderness not as an enemy to fight, but as a teacher to understand. And in that understanding, he sensed the first stirrings of true survival, the kind that would carry him through the longest, harshest nights. The morning sun was weak, a pale glow barely cutting through the heavy cloud cover. Snow crunched beneath the Apache's boots as he followed the Apache girl deeper into the forest. Days of survival lessons had hardened his body, but his mind was still raw, trying to grasp the full scope of the wilderness. Today the girl would teach him something he had never truly understood: respect for the land itself. They moved silently, side by side, the wind whispering through the trees like a living entity. She paused, crouched low, and pointed toward the snow-covered ground. Tiny depressions revealed the passage of a fox the night before. He had noticed footprints before, but she showed him how to interpret them. The size and shape indicating the animal's weight and speed, the depth of the imprint hinting at its energy level, the spacing revealing the path it would likely take next. "You must read the land," she said softly, her voice almost blending with the wind. "It speaks to those who know how to listen. You cannot survive by brute force. You must anticipate, observe, and respect it." The Apache watched carefully, realizing for the first time that survival was as much mental as it was physical. He had fought the wilderness with weapons, tools, and stubborn determination, but he had rarely paused to understand it. Now, guided by the girl, he began to notice the subtle patterns, the way the snow shifted with the wind, how certain trees indicated shelter from storms, how frozen streams concealed areas of danger or opportunity. She led him to a small ridge overlooking a frozen creek. From this vantage point, she demonstrated how to read cloud formations and the direction of the wind. The sky, she explained, held warnings, the hint of an approaching storm, the soft glow signaling a sudden thaw. The Apache's eyes widened as he realized that the wilderness offered countless clues, if only one took the time to see them. "Nature is not an enemy," she said, placing a hand on a tree trunk. "It is a teacher, a guide. You must respect it or it will punish you." As they continued, she taught him about energy conservation. He learned how to move with purpose, avoiding unnecessary exertion, how to balance warmth and exertion so he wouldn't overheat or freeze, how to navigate snowdrifts efficiently, and how to use shadows and terrain for protection. Every lesson was a subtle adjustment of body, mind, and perception, and the Apache began to feel a strange sense of harmony with the frozen landscape. The girl also taught him about the creatures of the land. Birds, rabbits, foxes, and deer were not merely prey. They were indicators of the environment's health, guides for navigation, and signs of upcoming weather. She showed him how to observe without disturbing, how to interpret the movement of animals as part of a larger ecosystem. Each observation strengthened his awareness, and he began to move not as a desperate survivor, but as a careful participant in the rhythm of the wilderness. By late afternoon, the Apache had gained more than knowledge. He had gained respect. He realized that the harshness of winter, the bite of the wind, the silence of the snow-covered forest were not merely obstacles, but teachers that demanded humility. He felt his fear of the cold begin to fade, replaced by a cautious admiration for the wilderness that had once threatened to destroy him. That evening, as they settled into their insulated shelter, he watched the girl adjust the layers of boughs above them with careful hands. She looked up at him and smiled faintly. "You are learning," she said. "Not just to survive, but to live. And living begins with respect." For the first time, the Apache understood what she meant. Respect was not about submission or fear. It was about awareness, patience, and understanding. It was about seeing the world not as a series of obstacles, but as a network of signs, lessons, and opportunities, all waiting for those willing to listen. As the cold night crept in, he lay beneath the insulating layers, his mind no longer only on survival, but on harmony. The wilderness had become more than a threat. It had become a guide. And in that understanding, he felt the first real sense of mastery, not over the land, but within himself. Night fell quickly, faster than the Apache anticipated, dragging the temperature down with it. The wind tore across the plains, howling through the trees like a chorus of restless spirits. The snow that had settled during the day now blew in sharp, stinging gusts, covering tracks and muffling sounds. The Apache huddled beneath the insulated shelter of boughs, leaves, and snow, teeth chattering, body trembling despite the layers of protection he had learned to use. The Apache girl sat nearby, calm and composed, her dark eyes scanning the white expanse as if reading secrets hidden in the storm. She had moved with confidence all day, but now she became a silent guide, showing the Apache that surviving the night required more than physical skills. It demanded mental control, patience, and trust. "You must remain calm," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Panic steals heat faster than the cold ever could. Let the snow and your body work together. Do not fight. Observe. Adjust." The Apache tried to obey, forcing his body to still itself, controlling each shiver, each panicked twitch. But the cold was relentless. Every inch of him ached. Frost bit at exposed skin, and the fear of hypothermia pressed on his mind like a weight. He struggled to focus, his thoughts racing, wondering if he had miscalculated, if he would survive the night at all. The girl shifted beside him, pressing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Breathe slowly," she instructed. "Feel the warmth you generate. Your body is your fire. Do not waste it on fear." He followed her instructions, inhaling and exhaling deliberately, forcing his body to relax into the shelter. Gradually, the trembling eased, replaced by a strange awareness of his own heat, circulating through the insulating layers. The snow around him held warmth, the shelter muffled the wind, and the cold became less of an enemy and more of a presence to respect and manage. Hours passed in a tense silence. The storm outside intensified, the wind rattling branches and whipping flakes against their shelter. The Apache felt every gust as if it were a physical strike. But each time he faltered, the girl's steady presence reminded him to recalibrate. Move a hand slightly to trap heat. Shift his weight to prevent frostbite. Adjust his breath to maintain warmth. Every micro-movement, every careful thought became a lesson in control. At one point, a particularly sharp gust penetrated the shelter, causing him to flinch violently. The girl placed a firm hand on his arm and whispered, "Do not fight it, adapt. Bend with the wind, do not resist it." Hesitant at first, he mimicked her calm movements, and for the first time, he felt the snow and wind less as adversaries and more as forces to work with. The long night continued. His body ached, but his mind began to sharpen. He noticed small patterns in the storm, the rhythm of the gusts, the way the snow accumulated in pockets, the subtle shifts in temperature indicating the storm's ebbs and surges. Each observation allowed him to anticipate the next challenge, to adjust before danger struck. By the pre-dawn hours, exhaustion weighed heavily on him, yet a sense of accomplishment warmed his chest. He had survived the night without fire, without succumbing to panic or despair. The girl smiled faintly beside him, acknowledging the progress he had made. "Tonight," she said softly, "you have learned more than warmth. You have learned endurance, patience, and trust, in yourself and in the land." As the storm began to relent, the first light of dawn touched the snow. The Apache lay beneath the shelter, his body battered but his spirit strengthened. He realized that true survival was not merely about fighting the elements. It was about understanding them, respecting them, and learning to coexist with them. For the first time, he felt not just the will to survive, but the quiet pride of mastery. The wilderness no longer loomed as a relentless enemy. It had become a teacher, and he, under the guidance of the Apache girl, had learned to listen. The first light of morning cut weakly through the dense clouds, casting a soft glow on the endless snow. The Apache awoke, muscles sore from the previous night's struggle, but with a newfound sense of confidence and awareness. He had survived the storm, learned to conserve heat, and found sustenance in the frozen wilderness. Yet as he opened his eyes, he realized that the most profound lesson of all might not be about survival alone. The Apache girl sat nearby, her dark hair dusted with snow, eyes scanning the horizon as she always did. She had guided him silently through every challenge, teaching him not just techniques but patience, respect, and the subtle rhythms of nature. Over the past days, he had come to rely on her guidance, and slowly, a quiet bond was forming between them, one that went beyond words. "Today, we move further," she said softly, finally speaking. Her voice was calm, measured, and carried an authority that the Apache found both reassuring and humbling. "You have learned the land. You have learned the cold. Now you must learn trust." The Apache nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Trust had not come easily to him. He had survived alone for years, relying on his strength and instincts. But she had shown him that survival was not only about skill, but about connection, to the land, to the creatures within it, and to those who could guide him. As they moved through the snow, he began to notice subtler details that he had previously missed. The sound of ice shifting under the weight of snow, the way wind whispered through certain trees, the faint scent of animal life carried by the cold air. He no longer felt like a man struggling against the wilderness. He felt like a participant in its rhythm, guided by someone who had mastered its secrets. Throughout the day, the girl continued to test him, not with words, but through action. She challenged him to cross icy patches without slipping, to read animal tracks and anticipate their movements, to forage in areas where food was hidden beneath thick layers of snow. Each challenge demanded focus, patience, and trust in her guidance and trust in his own growing abilities. During brief rests, they shared quiet moments, observing the frozen world around them. She did not speak much of herself, and he respected her silence, realizing that some wisdom could not be conveyed in words. Yet through gestures, shared glances, and the rhythm of their movements, a subtle understanding grew. He admired her resilience, her calmness, and her ability to thrive where he had once struggled. She, in turn, seemed to recognize his determination, patience, and willingness to learn, qualities that commanded her quiet respect. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing overlooking a frozen creek. The girl paused and turned to him. "You have changed," she said, her eyes meeting his. "You no longer fear the cold as you once did. You move with the land, not against it. You are learning more than survival. You are learning harmony." The Apache felt a swell of gratitude. She had saved his life, yes, but she had done more than that. She had taught him to see, to listen, to understand. In the process, he had come to care for her beyond mere admiration. The bond between them was no longer simply teacher and student. It was a quiet partnership born from shared struggle, mutual respect, and the intimate knowledge of surviving together in a harsh, unforgiving world. As evening approached, they settled into their shelter, preparing for another cold night. The Apache found himself glancing at her often, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireless insulation around them. He realized that their connection had grown stronger than the storm could ever be. For the first time, he understood that survival alone was not enough. Companionship, trust, and shared strength were equally vital. In the silent communication, in the subtle gestures of teaching and learning, they had formed a bond that transcended the cold, transcended words, and promised to endure as long as the winter held them in its grasp. And so, as they lay beneath their snow-insulated shelter, the Apache felt not just mastery over the wilderness, but the beginnings of a connection deeper than any storm, stronger than any blizzard, and warmer than any fire could provide. The frozen world outside was merciless, yet the Apache no longer faced it with fear. The lessons of the past days had reshaped him, turning desperation into skill, panic into patience, and helplessness into quiet confidence. He rose early, muscles still stiff but mind alert, ready to test the mastery he had gained under the Apache girl's guidance. Today, she led him toward a rugged slope where the snow was deep and uneven, the wind whipping down the hillside in sharp, icy gusts. It was a terrain he would have once avoided at all costs, certain that it would spell failure or injury. Yet now, he moved with measured steps, observing the snow and ice, adjusting his balance, and reading the landscape for hidden hazards. The girl walked beside him, silent but ever watchful, allowing him to take the lead. "You are ready," she said softly, her voice carried by the wind. "The cold tests everyone. Only those who listen, who observe, and who respect it survive. Today you face that test alone. In part, at least. I will guide. But you must rely on your own knowledge." The Apache nodded, feeling a surge of determination. He knew that survival was no longer about brute strength or luck. It was about understanding the land, anticipating danger, and respecting the forces around him. Each step, each decision reflected the lessons he had internalized. Insulation, breathing, controlled movement, foraging, and quiet observation of the environment. As they climbed the slope, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, nearly knocking him off balance. He instinctively adjusted his stance, curling slightly to conserve heat, moving with the rhythm of the gust rather than against it. The girl's approving glance confirmed what he already sensed. He was learning to work with the cold, not just endure it. They reached a narrow ledge overlooking a frozen creek, where survival would require every skill he had acquired. The snow was thin here, revealing patches of ice beneath, and the wind funneled sharply through the gorge. He paused, breathing steadily, scanning the terrain. He remembered her instructions. Every movement purposeful, every step calculated, energy conserved, and awareness heightened. With care, he crossed the treacherous stretch, adjusting to the subtle shifts beneath his boots, feeling the snow's resistance, and trusting in his body's instincts. When he reached the far side, he looked back at the girl, who nodded with quiet pride. "You have learned," she said. "The cold is no longer your enemy. You move with it, and in that movement you survive. You have mastered more than the snow and wind. You have mastered yourself." For the first time, the Apache felt a profound sense of achievement. The wilderness, once a relentless adversary, had become a classroom, a mentor, and a mirror reflecting his own growth. He realized that the cold, the snow, the wind, and even the scarcity of food were not merely obstacles but challenges designed to teach endurance, humility, and adaptability. Later, they settled in a sheltered grove, preparing for the night. The Apache built the fireless insulation himself, layering boughs and leaves with careful precision, placing snow strategically to protect against drafts. He gathered water and edible roots, maintaining the delicate balance between exertion and conservation of energy. The girl watched, silently affirming his competence. He had become a student no longer. He was now a peer, able to navigate the harsh world she had always known with skill and respect. As darkness fell, the wind howled once more, but he felt no panic. He lay beneath the insulating layers, body warm despite the cold, mind alert and heart steady. The lessons of days spent in the snow had crystallized into instinct. He could survive, adapt, and endure. Looking at the girl, he realized that his gratitude extended far beyond the practical knowledge she had imparted. She had transformed him, not just into a survivor, but into someone who could live in harmony with the wilderness. For the first time, he understood what true mastery meant. Not domination, but balance. Not fearlessness, but respect. Not merely survival, but a deep connection to the world around him. And in that quiet realization, as the wind raged outside and the snow blanketed the world in white, he felt an unshakable confidence no matter what the winter threw at him. He was ready. The morning dawned crisp and clear, the storm that had raged for days finally subsiding. The snow sparkled in the pale sunlight, untouched and pristine, reflecting a world that was both harsh and breathtakingly beautiful. The Apache stood beside the Apache girl, taking in the frozen landscape with a sense of calm he had never known before. He felt no fear, no desperation, only a quiet gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. Over the past days, the girl had guided him through the snow, the wind, and the cold, teaching him to survive where others might perish. She had shown him the secrets of fireless warmth, the subtle signs of life in the frozen forest, the art of conserving energy and reading the land. But more than skills, she had taught him humility, patience, and trust when in himself and nature, and in the wisdom of those who had walked the path before him. She turned to him, her dark eyes calm, almost unreadable. "You have learned well," she said softly. "The cold cannot harm you now, not if you remember what it has taught you. But my path lies elsewhere." The Apache felt a pang in his chest. He had grown reliant on her guidance, yes, but more than that. He had come to admire her strength, her resilience, and the quiet authority she carried without a word. He wanted to ask her to stay, to continue teaching him, but he understood her meaning. She was a spirit of the wilderness, unbound and independent, and it would be selfish to hold her back. I owe you my life, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not just my survival, but everything I have learned, everything I am now capable of. You taught me to endure, to observe, to respect, and to trust. She gave a faint smile, a rare crack in her calm exterior. You were willing to learn. That is why you survived. I only guided you. The rest was yours. A silence settled between them, filled with the sound of the wind through the trees, the distant creak of ice shifting, and the soft crunch of snow underfoot. In that silence, the Apache realized that their bond went beyond teacher and student. It was a connection forged through struggle, shared nights of cold and fear, triumphs over exhaustion, and the mutual understanding that comes from surviving together against a merciless world. Finally, the girl turned, her figure small yet commanding against the snowy horizon. She gestured for him to watch, then began moving gracefully into the forest, her steps light and precise, leaving barely a trace in the snow. The Apache followed her with his eyes, heart heavy yet filled with respect and gratitude. She had given him the ultimate lesson, the ability to survive and thrive independently, the knowledge to endure any storm, and the wisdom to honor the wilderness as a teacher rather than an enemy. As she disappeared into the trees, the Apache stood alone in the clearing, feeling a profound transformation within himself. The winter, once a brutal adversary, had become a mentor. The wilderness, once terrifying and unyielding, had become a realm of learning and respect. And the girl, whose quiet strength had guided him through the worst of it, had left a mark on his soul that would endure far beyond the coldest nights. He turned back to the shelter they had shared, now his own handiwork, and realized he no longer needed her constant guidance. He was capable, prepared, and attuned to the land. Every gust of wind, every crunch of snow underfoot, every subtle shift in temperature was now a signal he could read. The lessons she had imparted had become instinct, a part of him as deeply as the blood in his veins. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the snowy expanse, the Apache whispered a silent promise: to honor the wilderness, to remember the girl's teachings, and to live with the patience, respect, and skill she had instilled in him. He had survived the storm, mastered the cold, and, in the process, discovered a connection that transcended fear and hardship, a bond between student and teacher, human and wilderness, survival and understanding. And though the Apache girl was gone, her lessons remained, guiding him forward through the endless winter with quiet strength, unyielding wisdom, and the memory of a bond forged in the snow.